What happened?
Yeah, certainly not my finest moment. Just anticipated the start too much, and silly, simple error really with that, and then the crash just didn't anticipate the dirty air in the way I should have, clearly went into the corner way too hot,
Oscar Piastri, the man who had not missed the points in 44 consecutive races, suddenly stranded against the walls of Baku. The accident that tore apart McLaren's golden streak and left Formula One speechless. And the question that still hangs in the air, was it pure misjudgment, or the crushing weight of a world championship battle? The Azerbaijan Grand Prix of 2025 did not simply deliver another chapter of street racing chaos. It carved itself into the memory of every Formula One follower because it revealed a side of Oscar Piastri that few believed possible. Coming into Baku, the Australian carried a commanding advantage of 31 points over his teammate Lando Norris. For McLaren, it was a dream scenario, two drivers fighting at the top, one with a chance to place the title battle beyond doubt. Yet, within 48 hours, that dream mutated into a nightmare where not only points, but reputation, crumbled before the eyes of millions. The weekend began with a tremor rather than an earthquake. In practice sessions, Piastri brushed the unforgiving wall at turn 15, a mistake small enough to dismiss at first glance, but significant in what it foreshadowed. The precision that had defined his career wavered ever so slightly, and in a sport where margins are thinner than a sheet of carbon fiber, that wobble was a warning. Veteran observers noted it immediately. Could this be the first crack in the armor of a man who had strung together 44 races without a single miss in the points? Qualifying then took the tension to its peak. The session itself was historic, the most disrupted ever recorded in Formula One, with 6 red flags halting momentum again and again. Drivers wrestled with gusting winds and light drizzle, conditions that turned the streets of Baku into a casino where grip came and went without warning. Piastri, until then the master of control, pushed when it mattered most, and the outcome was brutal. He clipped the limit once more, this time at turn 3, braked too late, and his MCL 39 hit the barriers with such force that the chassis was destroyed beyond immediate repair. It was the sort of crash that does not only cost you time, it costs you confidence. The McLaren mechanics responded like heroes of the night, rebuilding a car around a spare chassis under the floodlights of the paddock. Regulations allowed the swap, but the symbolism was stark. A team that had been flying high now found itself fighting merely to put its driver back on the grid. The man who had arrived to Baku as favorite for pole position was now starting only 9th, carrying the scars of a misjudgment and the psychological weight of knowing his car had already been in pieces once that weekend. Then came the race start, the defining moment where pressure overwhelms instinct. As the 5 red lights illuminated, Piastri jumped too soon. His McLaren lurched forward, and in panic he halted, activating anti-stall. In a heartbeat, he was no longer a contender for the lead but a straggler at the back. The silence in his radio contrasted with the roar of rivals streaming past. That single movement, a fraction of a second out of sync, symbolized perfectly what this weekend had become, a collapse of rhythm, timing, and composure. By the time the field streamed into the opening corners, Piastri was fighting not for glory but for survival. He pushed aggressively, desperate to reclaim lost ground, and as the car snaked towards turn 5, he made the decision to attack. The outside line against Ocon looked tempting, but with cold tires and treacherous asphalt it became a trap. The lockup was immediate, the impact inevitable, and the Australian's race and his weekend ended with carbon fiber shattering against the barriers. This was not merely a crash. It was the public unmasking of the pressure that stalks every title contender. For the first time, Piastri was not the composed operator threading his car through chaos. He was the victim of it, swallowed by the very circuit where only 1 year earlier he had tasted victory. The irony could not have been sharper, and the symbolism not more punishing. And yet, this was only the opening act of a story that would haunt McLaren and redefine the fight for the 2025 World Championship. Because what unfolded after the crash, Piastri stranded by the circuit, forced to watch on a steward's phone, turned this from an ordinary racing incident into one of the most unforgettable images of modern Formula One. McLaren's scoreboard leaving Baku told the harsh truth. 6 points. Just 6. For a team that had not dipped below 12 all year, this was a collapse of historic proportions. The contrast was staggering, from regular podiums and relentless consistency to a single-digit haul that sent shockwaves through the paddock. When a championship battle is decided by margins as fine as tenths of a second, to surrender that volume of points in one weekend is not a blip, it is a wound. And wounds, in Formula One, invite rivals to smell blood. The crash in qualifying was not just an isolated accident, it was the moment the entire structure began to unravel. Piastri's MCL39 was left in ruins, its front right corner torn apart, and the chassis itself deemed beyond salvation. Mechanics worked through the night, a task as monumental as it was desperate, piecing together a spare chassis permitted by the regulations. The rule change introduced in February of 2024 allowed such a switch without penalty, provided the components matched precisely in design and weight. That technical lifeline kept Piastri in the race, but the psychological impact could not be so easily repaired. Sunday, however, delivered the ultimate blow. Piastri, lined up ninth on the grid, faced a chance to claw back momentum. Instead, as the red lights counted down, his nerve betrayed him. He moved too soon, launching forward before the grid was released. Instinctively, he stopped, and in doing so activated anti-stall. In that frozen instant, while his car hesitated, the rest of the field surged past. From contender to last place in the blink of an eye. That single misstep condemned him to fight from the rear on a circuit infamous for its narrow walls and minimal overtaking chances. Desperation became his fuel. Determined to salvage something, Piastri attacked into turn 5, targeting Esteban Ocon's Haas. Yet the combination of cold tires, turbulent air from cars ahead, and the notoriously slick asphalt at that section conspired against him. He braked late, too late. The front wheels locked immediately, and the McLaren plowed forward with no chance of correction. The impact was violent, the damage terminal, and the hope of a comeback extinguished within the opening kilometer of the race. That crash did more than scatter carbon fiber across the Baku walls. It ended a streak that had stood as Piastri's badge of honor, 44 consecutive races in the points. The longest run of reliability and performance of any young driver in recent memory was gone in an instant. Numbers that once symbolized control now stood as a reminder of how fragile success can be. McLaren, and Piastri himself, were left staring at the kind of weekend that changes not only a championship, but a career. To understand why Oscar Piastri ended his race in the wall at turn 5, we need to strip the moment down to its mechanics. The onboard footage revealed a sequence that every engineer dreads: cold tires struggling for adhesion, turbulent airflow disrupting braking stability, and a patch of asphalt more treacherous than any other corner on the circuit. As he approached, Piastri carried more speed than the grip available could tolerate. When he stamped the brake pedal, the front wheels locked instantly, leaving him as a passenger in a car that no longer listened to his steering inputs. From that point, the barrier was not an obstacle to be avoided, but an inevitable destination. The analysis afterwards confirmed what the naked eye had already suggested. Piastri's braking point was roughly half a second later than the average of his rivals. In Formula One, half a second is an eternity. His pressure on the brake pedal was aggressive, perhaps an attempt to claw back the time he had lost at the start. Yet with cold tires that had not reached their optimal window, and with the airflow thick with dirty air from Ocon's Haas, the result was catastrophic. The MCL39 simply refused to rotate, the car skidding forward in a straight line until the impact absorbed every ounce of energy. Karan Chandak, voice of analysis for Sky Sports, captured the essence in his commentary: he just locked up. Went straight on. There was no rescue possible. That blunt assessment reflected not only the violence of the incident, but its uniqueness. Few, if any, drivers had found trouble in that exact barrier all weekend. The fact that Piastri did so highlighted how narrow the margins had become for him in those opening laps. In chasing redemption, he fell into the trap that Baku was famous for, punishing even the slightest miscalculation with maximum severity. For a driver celebrated for his calm under pressure and precision in execution, this was deeply uncharacteristic. Throughout his rise in junior categories, and in his first seasons in Formula One, Piastri built his reputation on control, always braking at the very limit, but never beyond it. In Baku, that reputation cracked. The data did not lie. His inputs were rushed, his trust in grip levels misplaced, and his calculation under duress proved fatally optimistic. It was not a case of bad luck alone. It was a technical misjudgment, triggered by the psychological weight of recovery after a disastrous start. This corner, in less than 2 seconds, transformed Piastri's weekend from salvageable to irretrievable. It was not merely a racing error. It was the confluence of engineering fragility, circuit design, and human psychology. The type of moment that becomes a case study for teams, dissected in simulators and engineering briefings for months to come. And perhaps, for Piastri himself, the harshest lesson yet in how even champions in waiting are humbled when the car, the track, and the mind fall out of sync. The accident itself was brutal, but what followed was almost surreal. Oscar Piastri stepped out of the wreckage of his McLaren and found himself stranded, not in the safety of the pits, but on the far side of the Baku circuit, cut off from his team and from the race unfolding without him. With marshals unable to escort him back immediately, he was handed a simple folding chair and left to sit beside the track. The image of a world championship contender, helmet off, slumped in silence, contrasted so sharply with the noise and fury of Formula One that it seemed almost unreal. In that moment, he looked less like a gladiator of the grid and more like a spectator defeated by circumstance. What made the scene unforgettable was the detail that spread across social media within minutes. A marshal offered Piastri his mobile phone so he could watch the live broadcast of the race. There he was, the man who had fought for wins all season, reduced to following the action from a tiny screen as his rivals chased glory on the tarmac he had just left behind. It was humiliation in the most modern form. Not only had he lost the race, but he was forced to watch others succeed from the sidelines, unable to intervene, powerless to change what had already happened. Then came the long walk. When it was finally possible to move him, Piastri was escorted through nearly a kilometer of public streets and service routes, passing pedestrians and crossing under the track through a narrow tunnel. Photographers captured every step, including the moment his personal security guard finally reached him to guide him back to the paddock. The contrast was striking. Just an hour earlier, he had been fighting for his position in the World Championship. Now, he was navigating stairwells and underpasses like a lost traveler trying to find his way back to a hotel. This walk through the city became symbolic. Fans and journalists alike saw in it a metaphor for his weekend. From the height of control and dominance, Piastri had been brought down to earth, forced to blend with the public, stripped of the aura that usually surrounds a Formula One driver. It was as if Baku had not only dismantled his car, but also peeled away the illusion of invincibility. The photographs, shared endlessly across newspapers and online forums, told a story more powerful than any lap time or points table could express. It was this combination of failure and vulnerability that turned Baku from a bad weekend into a defining one. Crashes and retirements are common in Formula One. But the sight of a young star, sitting in a folding chair, watching his championship slip away on a borrowed phone, then trudging through the streets in defeat, is the kind of narrative that burns into memory. The dramatic twist was not only the loss of points, but the transformation of perception. Oscar Piastri went from untouchable contender to fallible human in the space of one Sunday afternoon. When we gather the fragments of Baku, the sequence of collapse becomes clear. It began quietly, almost innocently, with a brush of the wall during practice at turn 15. A moment dismissed at first as nothing more than pushing the limits, yet in hindsight the first crack in the surface of composure. From there, momentum shifted sharply. Qualifying delivered the second blow, a heavy crash into the barriers at turn 3, chassis destroyed, and a team forced into an overnight rebuild. What was once a weekend of opportunity had already turned into survival. Then came Sunday. Piastri's launch from 9th place should have been his chance to regain ground, but instead, it became the trigger for disaster. The jumpstart, the freeze of anti-stall, the sight of the entire field streaming past as he sat motionless on the grid. It was the third strike in a weekend already haunted by mistakes. And when desperation drove him to attack at turn 5, the final blow landed. The lockup, the impact, and the destruction of the McLaren marked the conclusion not of a race, but of a sequence that felt almost preordained. For errors, each feeding the next, culminating in the fatal accident that defined the Grand Prix of Azerbaijan 2025. The consequences were stark. McLaren left with only 6 points, its lowest tally of the season, while rivals celebrated. Piastri's proud streak of 44 consecutive points finishes, a record that symbolized reliability and control, ended against the Baku barriers. His lead in the championship shrank from 31 to 25 over Norris, and Max Verstappen edged closer, sensing weakness. More than numbers, it was the perception that changed. A driver once regarded as unshakable was now viewed as vulnerable, tested, and exposed. And above all else, the image that will remain is not the wrecked MCL39, but Piastri himself. First sitting in a folding chair beside the track, helmet off, forced to watch the race on a borrowed phone. Then walking through the streets of Baku like any ordinary pedestrian, escorted back to the paddock through tunnels and stairwells. These moments told the story more vividly than any results sheet could. They transformed a bad race into a symbol of collapse, the kind of weekend that stays etched in Formula One history as much for its drama as for its statistics.